So Trevor, a lot of people hear the word underwriting and don't really know what it means. Can you explain it a little better?
Yeah, so underwriting is just running the numbers on the property and doing a financial analysis. So it's figuring out things that you would want to know, such as your cash flow, how much rent you're bringing in, what your expenses are, and then coming up with return metrics based on those.
So you're just figuring out exactly what the property performs at and if that's acceptable for you to purchase the deal.
Correct. Yes.
Awesome. Trevor, can you take us through some of the basic terminology that everybody should know before they start underwriting their own deals?
Yeah, so let's start with gross rent. So that's one of the key metrics that people are looking for. It's just the total rental income you're bringing in on the property. It could include pet rent, utility bill back, all of those items. Then you have effective gross income. So effective gross income is just your gross rents minus your vacancy. Your vacancy accounts for when people are not in your unit, someone moves out, and it's the time it takes to go fill it again.
Yep.
So after that, we have NOI, which is your net operating income, and that just takes into account your income and your expenses to calculate that net number. And then we have debt coverage, which is your yearly principal and interest payment, so the total debt amount you have each year. And then we have DSCR. This is a super common term you start hearing in commercial real estate. It stands for debt service coverage ratio, and we'll dive a bit more into this later because it's pretty important for bank loans. Then you have cap rates, another key metric in commercial real estate. So a cap rate, lots of you guys have probably heard of it if you've looked into commercial real estate, also known as capitalization rate. All it is the return you would get on a property if you paid all cash for it. And we'll dive deeper into cap rates too, since it's a key metric. And then you have gross rent multiplier, GRM. It's just another formula used to help value a property that we'll dive into. And then other basic ones that you guys have probably heard of, we have loan pay down, so just the amount of principal you pay down on your loan year over year, cash flow, cash on cash return, and then we have ROI, which is return on investment, ROE, return on equity, we have AAR, average annual return, and then we have IRR, internal rate of return. And we'll dive a little deeper into those as well.
So I know a lot of people probably want to know, if they're doing quick math, which metrics should they pay attention to, or which metrics do you specifically pay attention to when you're underwriting a property for your investment strategy?
Me personally, I'm looking at IRR right now because I'm raising money for deals and using other people's money on a lot of them. If I'm just investing myself, I may not use that metric. I may be looking at leverage and then different return metrics I can achieve. So it's a little bit different depending on the investment strategy. But for people raising money and whatnot, IRR is a common one.
Cool.
So diving into the important ones, NOI is by far the most important metric you need to calculate. Again, the formula for that is just NOI equals income minus expenses. You gotta go figure out where all the income is and what all the expenses are. But this number dictates your property performance and is the most important to get right. And all these numbers, you're never gonna have 100% accurate. Property performance changes over time, but NOI is by far the most important. DSCR is another important one, and it's related to NOI. So again, DSCR is debt service coverage ratio, and this is the number the bank looks at to give you a loan. We're gonna deep dive this later on, but just to give you the high level, the formula for it is DSCR equals your NOI divided by your annual debt. So this gives you a number such as, like, for example, if you had $125,000 of income and $100,000 of debt for the year, your DSCR would be 1.25. And that 1.25 is a key number that we're going to dive into later on. But that's just to show you how your NOI relates to your DSCR, and then the bank will look at your DSCR to determine the loan you can get.
Got it. So the bank is looking at the actual performance of the property, income minus expenses, and does that cover the debts that you're going to have to make on those payments for the debt you're requesting?
Correct, exactly. So that's the ratio, the net operating income divided by the debt, and that's the debt service coverage ratio.
So to be clear, a 1.25 DSCR is like 100. Your income on the property is going to be 125% of the debt that you're paying to cover it.
Exactly. So you're making $1.25 for every dollar of debt you have. So if it was a 1.5, you would be making $1.50 for every dollar of debt.
Perfect.
Cap rates are probably the most talked about metric in commercial real estate, especially in the multifamily sector. And again, this just shows you the return on investment if you paid all cash for a property. So this is super helpful because it lets you compare different properties. So you may know in a specific market, apartments of 10 to 30 units that are built in the 70s to 90s trade at a 6 cap. So now you can go compare these apartments between each other, even though they all have different amounts of debt on them.
Yep.
So it's just a thing. It's not the end all be all, but it is used quite a bit. You may have a property that's underperforming, it's a low cap rate, and it could still be a good deal, or you may have a property that's a really high cap rate, and it could be a crappy deal. So it's just a metric to use, but it is the most common one you talked about in commercial real estate.
Yeah, and the way I've always thought about cap rates personally is they are actually a pretty true performance of the return of a property. Leverage is what makes returns really hard to calculate. So if you buy a stock, you buy it 100% in cash, and then its return is going to be based off of that 100% dollars. But with real estate, we get to borrow, and that can make our returns a little funny. But if the property itself, its return, its value is going to be based off of that 100% cash purchase.
Exactly. So what he means by that is just a cap rate is your return on investment, again, if you paid all cash. So to give you guys the formula for this, your cap rate equals your NOI divided by your price times 100%, just to put it in a percentage format. So let's say you bought a property for $1 million and it had $60,000 of NOI. So again, you could have like $100,000 of income, $40,000 of expenses. That would get you to $60,000 of NOI. Your cap rate would be 60,000, your NOI, divided by your $1 million price. That would give you 0.06 multiplied by 100%, and that's a 6% cap rate. Just to give you guys an example of how that math would work out and what that formula looks like. So that means if you paid all cash for that property, you would have a 6% return on investment, not including any appreciation or anything else, just from your cash flow, essentially.
I know that with cap rates, you can also use the market cap rate to help determine the value. Can you explain how you use that side of cap rates?
Yeah, so within the cap rate formula, we have your cap rate equals your NOI divided by your price. So we just determined how you get to that cap rate if you know NOI and price.
Right.
Let's say you're going and trying to figure out what the value of it is, and you don't know what the price is. It's not listed. They're telling you to make them an offer.
Yep.
But you know the market cap rate there may be a 6% cap rate, and stuff is trading around that, and you can go calculate the specific NOI of the property by looking at the income and expenses. This can help you get to that price or value for that property. So you just do some algebra, and then you have the formula price equals your NOI divided by your cap rate. Well, if we had $60,000 of NOI and we knew it was a 6% cap rate, but we were trying to figure out price, we would take that $60,000, divide it by 0.06, and that would get us to our $1 million again. So same exact formula, you can just move it around to come up with value. So to really ingrain this in your guys' head, this is the part that you really want to understand. So let's say you're buying a property at a 6% cap rate and you're increasing rents, and you're trying to figure out how much value does this add to the property. We're going to take that same formula, price equals your NOI divided by your cap rate, and we can come up with the value. So value equals NOI divided by cap rate. So let's assume we have a 5-unit building, right? We increase rents, it's at a 6 cap. You're buying a 6 cap, just fair market rate, and that's what stuff is trading for there.
Okay.
We increase each rent by $100 per month on each of these units, right?
So it's $500 per month.
Yep, correct. So our NOI would be our $100 per month times 5 units, $500 per month, times 12 units, right? So that gives us $6,000. So we then take our $6,000 divided by a 0.06 to come up with how much value is added. So we would take that number, divide by 0.06, and that gives $100,000 of value added to that property. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, so if you take that a step further, let's say you buy a fair market price of a 6 cap, but it's $300 below rent on each one, right? You can increase the value of the property based on cap rates by $300,000.
Just on a 5-unit property.
Just on a 5-unit property by such a small rent raise. So a lot of properties are below market rent. The problem is you're typically buying it at a lower cap rate and having to catch up. So you're doing the math to figure out the delta and if it makes sense.
That's awesome. I do have one clarifying question. You mentioned NOI is income minus expenses, but then to calculate the NOI, you just did the increase in income. Why aren't you calculating expenses in that formula?
In that case, I'm just assuming expenses were flat and we just increased income, so there's not additional expense with it. So that's a really good question. Your property management fee might go up a little bit if it's based on gross rents, so it's not exact.
But for the most part, expenses aren't increasing just because you increase rent.
Typically not. Typically your only expense that's going up at the same rate as rent is property management because it's based off a gross amount of rent.
Got it.
The next formula is for GRM. That stood for gross rent multiplier, and it's GRM equals your price divided by your gross annual income, or rents, same thing. But this is another metric that people use in commercial real estate to help come up with values of properties. So just to give you guys an example, if you had $1 million 6-unit with $1,200 rents on each unit, we would take our GRM to figure it out. GRM equals $1 million divided by our 1,200 per unit times 6 units times 12 months, and that would give us an 11.6 GRM. So typically, as that number's increasing, well, always as that number's increasing, it means you have a higher rent per the value of that property.
So for GRM, you're using annual rents, not monthly rents, correct?
Correct. Then we have our return metrics. So these are the things like I was talking about, your ROI, your AAR, your IRR, and all that, that actually tells you your return on investment. So starting out with ROI, your ROI equals your dollars gained divided by your dollars invested. A lot of you guys are pretty familiar with this, same formula used in stocks and all that. And then we have AAR. So AAR is pretty similar to ROI, except for it takes into account the year over year. So let's say you had 100% ROI over 10 years, your AAR would be your ROI divided by number of years.
Yep.
So 10% per year is your return there. The next thing is ROE, return on equity, and it's calculated in a similar way. It's ROE equals your dollars gained divided by the equity you have in the property multiplied by 100% to put it in percentage form. And then we have IRR. So IRR is a little bit more complex. It's similar to AAR as it takes into account your return over time, but it also takes into account the decreasing value of money over time. So this you can't actually calculate by hand. Here's a formula for it. You have to use financial calculators to actually dial it in, or you have to do a bunch of iterations. But this is the main metric I would say used with higher level syndications and investors raising money for deals. Most people that are starting out, they're looking at your ROI, your average annual return, your return on equity, and then your cash on cash return as well.
So the difference between a lot of those return metrics and like a cash on cash is a lot of those return metrics are taking into account non-cash factors like appreciation, depreciation, principal pay down, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, so real estate pays you in 4 different ways. You have appreciation, depreciation, cash flow, and loan pay down. So cash on cash is just taking into account your cash flow, but you could have a property that's just breaking even for forever, but you could have a super high return because your loan could be structured a different way, you're adding value to it, whatever it may be.
So to drill down on maybe just the ROI specifically, you're going to take, hey, my property appreciated $20,000 this year. I made $5,000 in cash flow. My principal pay down was $5,000, and in depreciation I was able to capture about a couple $1,000s of cash value. You just add all those things up and then divide it by property, correct?
Exactly. So you would add those all up, divide by your dollars initially invested, and that would be your return on investment. Yep.
Perfect. Hey Trevor, if anyone had questions on what we've gone through so far, how would they contact you?
Yeah, you guys can go into the community section. You can find the tags where people are asking questions and go in there and ask whatever you want, and we'll hop in there and answer questions for you. If you just want to skip ahead and have us help you purchase properties and run through all these numbers, click the link below in the description.